Vote. Some people say, Franklin, what would your father have done? You know, I hear that a lot. I believe that if he were my age and he were here today, he would be doing exactly the same thing. Why do I say that? Because in 1952, here's something he said. I think it's the duty of every individual Christian at election time to study the issues and candidates and then go to the polls and vote. He said, now listen up, church. If I were a pastor of a church, I believe I would explain to my people where each candidate stood morally, spiritually, and in relationship to the church. He said, I feel that we're going to have to meet our political obligations as Christians and make our voice known if America is to be preserved with a type of Christian heritage, which has given us the liberties and freedoms that we now enjoy. For unless America turns back to God, repents of its sin, and experiences a spiritual revival, we will fail as a nation. I believe God honors leaders in high places who honor Him. We need today men and women in high places who are willing to honor Almighty God. America is being stripped of its biblical heritage and God-inspired foundations. You know, growing up, my generation, we were afraid of the red threat. The commies were coming. Remember that? I went to a little school in western North Carolina, and that school was a designated civil defense shelter. It had this little sign, black and yellow, radioactive, you know. And they had food. They had crackers stored in there. Crackers that would last for 40 years. Rats wouldn't even eat it. But we were ready. We had drills, like an atomic bomb was going to go off. We'd all get under our desks and put our hands over our heads like that's going to do any good, right? But we were ready. And then the red threat disappeared when the Berlin Wall came down. And we all just sighed a sigh of relief. Wow, we dodged that bullet. Man, that's great. We began to let our military get weaker, and we began just to say, you know, we don't need all this. But while we were taking that sigh of relief, secularism, which is the same as communism, godless secularism, crept into our government in Washington. And it has infected the political system, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, all of those that work in Washington, and then it began to get into our schools, our universities. It began to get into our state houses. It got into our mayors. It's got into every level of government over 40 years. It just didn't happen overnight. It's happened over 40 years. And godless secularism is now running our country. And many places, if you prayed publicly, you're going to get sued. You see, the secularists want to intimidate the Christians. They want you to shut up. The only place they want you to mention God's name is inside a church. And that's what happened in communism. That's what happened in Russia. There were churches in Russia. But you could only worship inside a church. If you got outside the church property, you would be arrested. This is where we're heading. We have allowed God to be taken out of our government. We have allowed God to be taken out of the political process. Now, I'm running a campaign. But I'm running a campaign not for Franklin Graham. I'm running a campaign for God. Okay? God, back into your discussion. When I was growing up, there was the Ten Commandments on the wall in our classroom. And somebody said we need to take those down because there's other religions and it may offend other religions. You know what? It wasn't other religions that built the United States of America. In God's Word, His commandments, they took them down. And I've heard people say, well, Franklin, you know, if you had a godless teacher standing there teaching the class and God's 10 Commandments were up there, what difference does it make? It makes a lot of difference because it's God's standards. Young people today don't know the difference between right and wrong in many schools. We see school shootings and we see all these other things. Listen, when I was growing up, we all had guns. We lived out in the country. We never thought about taking our guns to school and shooting anybody. We have taken God out of our schools. And that's where this violence is coming from. Because we've taken God out of our schools, we've taken him out of our government, and he's taken out of people's hearts. And we have a generation of young people today that don't know God. Don't know his standards. They don't know his love. Our country's in trouble. We used to have the Lord's Prayer when I was in school. And we allowed a couple of people to bring a lawsuit, and we took prayers out of school. Well, I've had people say, well, Franklin, you have some godless teacher up there leading the school in the Lord's Prayer. What good does that do? Well, it's not her prayer, it's the Lord's Prayer. Who knows what good it'll do? But at least the kids are hearing the Lord's Prayer, not her prayer, the Lord's Prayer. We used to have the Pledge of Allegiance, and a lot of schools across this country have taken the Pledge of Allegiance out of school. Can you imagine? But this is how far we're falling, how far we have gone. My father said in 1976, he said, get involved in the political process. He said, this coming year is an election year. I'd like to challenge every deeply committed American who is qualified to think about running for political office. I don't believe that we as Christians should withdraw, he said. We need men and women of integrity. Christians who are committed. Christians who will run for political office this coming year. No matter to which political party you belong. You say to Franklin, how about separation of church and state? How about it? You see, the enemy wants to use that, and it's a lie. We were never to have separation of church and state. Here's the issue. Our forefathers came from Europe, where there was state-controlled religion. Our forefathers didn't want a state-controlled religion. They wanted us to be free to worship God however we want to worship God. But they did not expect us to take God out of government. The enemy has used this separation of church and state to try to get Christians to keep their mouths shut, to where we're afraid to speak out. And the enemy will tell you, oh, you Christians are intolerant. They want you to think that telling a person that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, they want you to believe this is hate speech, that we're intolerant. Really? Well, I'm going to be really intolerant, because there is no way to God except through Christ. I'm not here to put down somebody's religion. I'm not here to put down what people believe. I'm just telling you what the foundations of this nation were built on. And if people come to this country and don't like the foundations we're built on, they don't have to stay. My father said in 1952, I was born in 1952. I'm getting old. He said it's the duty of Christian men and women to offer themselves for public office. One reason we've had such bad political leaders is because in some places only the bad ones offer themselves for service. There are many places where Christian men and women could get the vote if only they would offer themselves for service. In the Bible we read about Daniel. Daniel was a man of God. He served in a heathen country, but he was prime minister under 7 kings and 2 empires. We need Daniels today. Men and women who will purpose in their heart that they'll not defile the living God. Now the choice may not always be clear, all right? When you go to the election, to the polls, it may not always be clear. You might have to hold your nose. You might have to vote for the least of the two heathens, okay? But we talk a lot about the presidential polls, all right? Now, this year it's been interesting, okay? But we vote. We talk a lot about these national elections, but how about who our mayors are? You know how important that is? City council members, county commissioners, school boards. We need to take the school boards of America back. You see, the I'm busy, and I don't have time. I can't run. You know, school boards don't meet every day. They don't meet every week. They may meet for a few hours once a month. In some smaller places, it may be once every 2 months. I don't know. County commissioners, city council, many of these people in some of these smaller communities meet just a few times a month. For a few hours in an evening, every one of you here, every one of you, could run for something and probably win if you're willing to offer yourself. You see, we need men and women of God who are willing to offer themselves, to pray, and just think about the school boards. Could you imagine if you were on the school board and somebody says, I've got a book we think all the students should read, in some filthy book, and you could stand up and say, no, that's pornographic. Oh, you're one of those Christian haters. That's right. I'm a follower of the living God, and this is trash. We're not going to allow it into our school. That can happen. We had a mayor in Charlotte. It was one of these awful elections, Charlotte, North Carolina. Nobody went to the polls. Less than 8% of the city showed up to vote. And the gays and lesbians ran one of their candidates, right? First thing she does, right out of the block, she mandates, and they pass an ordinance that bathrooms have to be open up to transgender people. Okay? I understand transgender people need to go to the bathroom. But I can tell you this right now, but a man pretending to be a woman has no business in a woman's bathroom. Girls lock the room. And so our state, the governor had to have a special legislation, bring everybody back, and they passed a bill to protect statewide the bathrooms so that young girls and children and women don't have to have some man pretending to be a woman in their restroom. That's why it's important to run. We need the Christian voice. We need God's voice. And the church has been quiet. We've allowed over the last 40 years all of this trash to take place. It's time we fight back, okay? Now, I can tell you one thing. I'm not going to back up and I'm not going to run. But I've got to ask you to join me and stand and let's fight together and let's stand for God's truth.